What's up, everybody? Welcome back. This is part number 4 of the automated special. John Levesque here, along with Apostolos and Pranav. We're still waiting on Kent to rejoin us, but that's okay. We have, in our previous episodes, covered design principles. We have covered empowering, planning, and engaging. And now we are going to talk about where the rubber meets the road. We're going to actually talk about a real use case here. We've talked a lot of theory. We've had some good conversation, but now Apostolos is going to show us an actual use case, what it means, how it was built, and more importantly, though, why those things were chosen to be part of that solution. Apostolos, over to you, my friend.
Thank you, sir. So, yeah, let's get started with sharing my screen.
You
Okay.
can just keep your face on as well. That looks good.
He does have a nice face.
He does. He's a very soothing, that's what I think. When I look at a posters, I'm like, the world is so much better.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so just to recap, we have talked about empower, discover, plan, and design. So let's see how we can really, walk the talk and to bring all those principles, at least partially, into a demoable state with an end-to-end scenario, which is really, coming from a real world. It has been coming from a real world scenario, which is touching almost all facets of the Power Platform, but also the ecosystem around Azure and many other of these components we had discussed before. So if we look at build and test, the core topics we will be covering is the difference between cloud flows development, the API flows, or the flows as we have called them before, desktop flows. Those were the UI flows, which have been luckily renamed to desktop flows. Then a so-called concept, human in the loop. That means that as part of your orchestration and your overall business process and automation, you would require a human to make a call or a decision or some interaction of a human in order to proceed with the judgment to the next process step. And this is called what we refer to human in the loop. Then credential store, how do you securely store those credentials and where do you store those credentials? Reusable templates, especially if you have many orchestration or many business automation or flows, how to orchestrate them, how to use child flows and so on, and just make them reusable. Then build the process either in a part flow, in a desktop flow or in a cloud flow, logging, monitoring, exception handling, and here not the exception handling what we traditionally think about, but really touching exception as a business exception, as an IT exception, as an application exception, and many other exception types. And there, John, it's very important. This is one of the topics where you have to think about from a design perspective, right? So how do you define an exception handling object, if you would like, right? Is it something very specific to a business process? Is it something very specific to an application? Let's say you would like to capture Dynamics 365 exceptions or CRM exceptions or banking exceptions, or is it something you put much more generically out there, which is an exception object, which can handle all sorts of those things. So this comes, of course, with trade-offs. Like, the more generic you get, the more information you need, and the more you have to do further down the line to make this context aware to your exception. But at least from a data store and reporting and all the analysis capabilities around that, you want to keep it as generic as possible. Okay, and those are another from enterprise perspective. Why design principles and design thinking is really very, very important. Now, then we will show also the auditing capability, which come out of the box from Dataverse. Also things, most of the folks which are new to Microsoft Automation are not really aware of that, because Dataverse, it's not only the data store where the flows and the scripts are stored. This is really a hyperscale database as a service. It's a whole data access layer which features APIs and all sorts of integration and different application and database technologies beneath it, that it's much more than only, I store something in a table and in a field. And to leverage those out of the box, that's also something which we consider in design thinking and design principles. Okay, and then last but not least, we will actually be able to, if we have orchestrated and designed our automation respectively, we will be able to get some automatic return on investment telemetry out of that, like, how many flow runs, what was the duration, how many failures, what was the error rate, what was the redo rate, what was the amount of business exception, how have these business exceptions really lowered throughout the maturity of the life cycle of a bot, and so on and so forth. So many things you have to think about, and what we're trying to do now with this end-to-end scenario is really surface some of those concepts. Make sense?
Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. I think the part I'm excited about is some ROI conversation. I think that a lot of times, we have conversation about how, we have conversation about why, we have how to, and all that, but to get to actually see some ROI is something quite rare. So I think the bottom of the list is actually my top point for this demo.
Exactly. And that's what I wanted also to say. Usually we have to put this on top because this will dictate what your design will look like. In order to capture and to tell ROI figures in telemetry, you have to capture them. In order to capture them, you have to have the foundation and also, all these signals feeding into your design and database to derive those insights. Exactly. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about a real-world use case. So the use case we will be touching today and also walking through end-to-end with all the components of the Power Platform, or most of them at least, is around invoice processing. So you have, imagine now you are a supplier. You are a supplier of office equipment or of maybe electronic equipment, or in our case, about Surface laptops and Surface Duos and all these kind of Microsoft electronic equipment. And you supply these goods and also maybe repair services to a company, and you are issuing invoices. Okay, so issuing this invoice, and you send those invoices sometimes to a form processing or to an email, dedicated email at the customer side, which is then taking our scenario here. This email, a Cloudflow monitors a shared inbox where all those invoices from suppliers will land in. And then it is starting to process those invoices. The first step in that part will be to run that through the AI builder OCR capability, the form processing capability, which means it will extract all the important information a business user has defined as important and save those results in a Dataverse, entities. Okay. From there on, once these have been predicted and also extracted, there is a desktop flow triggered, which takes all this information and transfers this into an ERP system, in our case an SAP system, and performs also a lot of checks around the invoice validity. We will have, as part of that process, we will have two kinds of exceptions, and those are mainly business exceptions. So the first exception will be that the invoice amount and also the subtotal and the VAT amount, they are absolutely correct, but the VAT percentage on that invoice document is wrong. Okay, so there was a clerical error from the vendor side, from the supplier side, which doesn't harm to be in our system because the figures are right? With the documentation is there, and then a business user, the human in the loop, can make a call if this is something severe or not, or if they approve these clerical error, let's say, and to proceed with the rest of the business processing. Okay. The second business exception we will be having is the case now during the pandemic, especially in Germany. The government has decided to lower the VAT rates for 2020 because of the economic situation from 19 to 16%. And if you are an external, an international vendor like our vendor in this case, they might not know that the local regulations have changed. Okay, so they have submitted the invoice with 19% VAT still, and there's a second exception. The system shouldn't allow this invoice to be processed because the VAT amount and the percentage is too high. Make sense?
John, would you be against a reduction of taxes?
You know, I am never against a reduction of taxes. I think that that finding and refunding tax overages is God's work.
Exactly. So, and these are, and these are real business use cases and real world scenarios, right? And this is, I think, what resonates and how you can translate this now into a low code, no code solution. That's what we're trying to solve here. Okay. So then there's a fusion team, where the business users, the COE, the RPA COE, the automation COE work together, and they rectify those business exceptions and also other exceptions together, right within Microsoft Teams in a Power Up embedded in Teams, where they can make a call. Okay, this is a business exception, and here are the things I can maybe do some changes on the document itself, which are audited. We will see in a second, or I can ask them, the supplier, to resend those invoices and so on. Okay, so at the end of the day, the vendor is informed about the invoice status, of course, through email, and the thing ends there.
All right.
Makes
I like
sense?
this. Yeah, it's good.
Okay.
Where the rubber meets the road, all of our concepts coming together. I'm liking this. I'm ready to see it.
Super. All right, so what we have done, we've built here a so-called automation center. What you see here in front of us is a model-driven Power Up. Okay, this has completely designed and developed without a single line of code. Okay, in a very short amount of time. So this platform we are seeing here is also what our Dynamics 365 business apps solutions are based on and running on. Okay, so those are power ups. This is a power up. Then we have said, in order to derive all this telemetry for the ROI stats, we need, of course, to have some metadata about some information about the automation which is planned to be implemented here. Okay, so the first part will be, so we have defined here a couple of Dataverse tables. One of them is the automation catalog. Here in this automation catalog, we are capturing information, what is the primary driver for this improvement? What is the primary process challenge today? What is the complexity? What are the process peaks? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Is it daily? Is it hourly? And so on. What are the average steps in that automation you're planning to do? Is the data which is incoming, outgoing structured? What is the percentage of digital input in this? Or, and how much is really then human input? And here are some roll-up fields which are calculated automatically. This is the telemetry in the ROI stats here, total cloud flow processing time, total desktop flow process time. Those are feeding all in from our automation. Okay, then the next thing is process volume. What is the frequency? What is the volume? What is the current cost per year without the automation? What is the average error rate? So those things that we want to, to benchmark against at the end of the day, so that we have a starting point, and then we can measure, okay, how far did we either improve the error rate, lower the error rate, higher the throughput, or any other, business kind of KPIs you would like to drive and then capture with this whole thing. Then we have here what is also important on the lower part. This automation object here has a lot of artifacts. So you can have child flows, you can have desktop flows, you can have tables of Dataverse, you can have connection references, custom connectors. So all your artifacts which are part of that automation catalog record here, it's important to capture them as well, because every execution of those flows and every time sensitive situation for those flows will again be able to capture those durations and everything which are feeding back again, and how many of those had failures, right? So it's important to combine this in a central entity, which is then called, in our case here as an example, automation catalog. All right, does it make sense so far?
Makes a lot of sense.
This is good. And I think the good thing I like about this is, like, often enough when we to your earlier point, this is without the buzzwords, because often enough we talk about invoice processing. I processed an invoice and I get these logs, but okay, what about invoice number 3? What happened? We don't. And And a lot of it, this you'll see as infrastructure that one could build up to build a general solution to what Apostle was talking about. You could sort of take this, and instead of invoices, you could sort of build something else like claims. But then sort of the metadata stays the same, and so you can start to leverage the same system across your team, your organization, and stuff. And that's why when we started, we also said this is experimental. Like we're just trying to see like where do we land in that spectrum of stuff, and if the story kind of gels. And so to our viewers, if you have any feedback, we're more than happy to sort of take it in and adjust as well.
Yeah, this is absolute spot on, Pranav. This is to support our end-to-end journey, right? It's really to have something we can always reference to. Also, all other videos we will be doing, they will be likely focused on that use case and also on the artifacts we are having here. But that's not something prescriptive. Again, this is just showing how you can leverage, how you can use the Power Platform to drive Power Platform adoption and also ROI starts and so on. Okay, so
real quick, one question, just to clarify. So what we're seeing is a custom model-driven app, correct?
Correct.
And then when you go to the process volume and business exceptions, all these fields that you showed us, that these are fields that we're asking a user to then fill in about the process, correct?
Correct, exactly.
Awesome. Okay, and then from there, what we get is this structure down below that shows us everything that's connected to this process, and also a bunch of roll up and calculations based on the input of what that user put in those fields we requested, right?
So yeah, so this one you configure. You go as as the COE admin, as the maker of that automation. You really, as you develop, you add them to your library here, right? So whatever is then producing either errors or having improvements or taking time, it can really play back to this overall stats here. We can derive then later on in Power BI. Okay.
Got it. Okay.
Exactly. So, but the model you see here is a completely custom model. This could be anything. So whatever you would like to define, these are just tables here in Dataverse. So if you're looking here at our Dataverse solution, this whole thing, this end-to-end scenario, those are the items which have been defined as part of that solution. And one of them is a model-driven application, as we call it, which is, if I find it, which is here. So if I go here to the edit mode, there's no magic, what I said before, not a single line of code. And it's, of course, highly enterprise ready, because this is the base for our Dynamics 365 business applications. So here I can just say, for instance, the sitemap, what you see on the left-hand side, this is the menu structure, right? I can just define a new one, I create new ones and so on. The same goes here for my entities. So these are the entities which are referenced here. Then entities have forms, they have views and so on. So you can really, pick and choose whatever you would like to surface as a model-driven application. And this is then the result where you can have those here in the menu structure and all these functionalities here.
Nice.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now, from an ROI perspective, it's of course also important to slice those by process cluster. For instance, one process cluster could be accounts payable, finance, controlling, or manufacturing, shop floor control, whatever. So, and then you have subclusters. Again, in accounts payable, you could have vendor invoicing, you could have disputes and so on. Okay, collection and recoveries, maybe for customer relevant stuff, and so on. Then you have process partners as well, which is also something you can define as you like. So it's important when you receive those invoices, you don't want to accept, of course, invoices from foo at foo.bar.com. Okay, so that's why you can say, if an email comes in with that email address, then you do a lookup here and say, okay, what AI model, and this is where we have the AI builder later on, what email can process what form processing documents. This is also what you can here centrally manage. Then you have a Cloudflow template which checks only that, and you call this as a child flow in your whatever main flows later on. And this is how you can structure those easy and simple checks in the beginning. Okay, so speaking about AI Builder, the document I have designed for this the invoice we have defined for this use case looks something like this, right? So you have a vendor, which is Contoso Parts Limited. Then we have their supplier of electronics. And here we have a couple of devices. And then we have a 16% VAT here and the overall amount. So in AI Builder, which is our democratized platform for machine learning, there you can build and train models. Okay, so building and training model means that you can give it a couple of invoices, claims, or whatever document you would like to give it. And the system can then analyze those documents, and you can define specific places in that document, like an invoice number in our case, an invoice date, where you can say, okay, dear OCR, please capture those fields automatically whenever something I'm running through the processing. And now, since the October release, we have also the option per AI model to define different collections of invoices, because I mean, every vendor, maybe a vendor has even 10 different templates per vendor. And if you have then 1,000 vendors, it's of course impossible to define 1,000 AI model to capture them. So with this new feature, we will be able to have different invoice layouts in one AI model to be trained. Okay. So what I've done here, I have then defined those fields. So if you go here back, you can say, okay, those are the fields I would like to capture, build to, contact, date, total, and so on. And then I've gone through and trained that model and provided this as a published model to Power Automate. Okay. So this was the second part. Then if we look here on these two items, whenever I receive a new email, this is automatically processed by a Cloudflow, which is checking, okay, is this a supported partner? Do we have really an attachment, which is also an invoice? What is our confidence store that is this layout? What is the confidence store that the detected fields are also, sufficiently detected that we can process this later on? So there are a couple of checks happening here in this document queue, in this main flow here. If we look here in that view, how it looks like, we will not go into details now, but just to give you a glimpse how a Cloudflow looks like, which is capturing all that information. So here, whenever a new, sorry, that's not the one. This one, that's the one. This is the second one. So
It's good to so all these are, it's good to see that these Lego boxes, going back to our earlier conversation as well, that you can sort of plug and play based on how extreme or how sort of minute level details you want to capture, both as a developer and then on the other side as a COE as well, in terms of tracking automation and stuff. And we're showing John a lot of these nuts and bolts over here from a bottoms up approach on how the solution was built, because often enough we go top down and we sort of don't show these nitty-gritty details and stuff. So it's very interesting on how all this sort of comes together.
okay, so this is the flow. It looks very sequential. What I said before, if you look at the chart again, this is where we start, monitoring a shared mailbox. This is all coming from our Office 365 stack. These are standard connectors. I'm doing some initialization. I'm getting some parameters, and then I have a try catch finally block for exception handling. This is a pattern we can use here, and then I'm doing different checks. First of all, do we have an attachment? Check if the vendor is whitelisted. And then check each attachment that's of the right attachment type here as well. And then I'm doing the prediction of my OCR only then. So I'm running through a couple of checks before I do really the stuff which has to be done in order to proceed. Then I'm extracting those fields from the OCR results, and then I'm processing a couple of other stuff. So once this has been done, I'm informing already the vendor that the initial check has been done, and we will be working on that invoice within the next 24 hours. If I go back now in my automation center, this is where these invoices will be landing in. So if we look at here on one of these invoices, this is the information we have captured now automatically from the document, which is bill to, due date, invoice line, invoice number. And here next to it, I have also the confidence store. How confident was the AI prediction that this one is a total field? Okay, so and we come to this in a second. And here on top, because I have defined also that automation catalog header record, I can say here, okay, who is the business owner for that invoice? Whenever an exception happens, I want to know where to go to, right? I want to have somebody who takes care of that. Then there's the status, queue entry date, last processing start, last processing end, and many other things here where we can capture. Now we have again ROI stats, which are automatically coming in from all our flows, either desktop flow or cloud flow, which is again capturing that in seconds, right? Or here confidence score if I want to see, okay, how confident have I been for different properties here within those attachments, okay? So and this is then once this has been entered into our document queue, as soon as it is entered, it has the status ready. And then it's automatically taken on to the next step and take this record and put it, if everything is okay, tries to put it into an ERP system, in our case, SAP, where another set of checks has been done. What I said before, is the invoice amount correct? Is the VAT correct? Does it fit to the current country, and so on? So and if there's a business exception, we will have, as we said before, 2 of them. Then those are fed back here to that system. And here you see then the status of the business exception, and the user can then interact here. Okay, so let me start by sending a couple of emails to that address, if I find it. So let's say this one. Okay, so this is my shared mailbox. Then I have here my 3 invoices. We have seen before different things. You see here it's 19%, but you cannot know, but the invoice amounts, they fit. And then on the 5th one, we have really something where not only the invoice text 19% is wrong, but also the calculation is 19%. And those will raise business exceptions, okay? Send that now to that system. And if we have a look at the flow, which is then processing this is the second flow, right? And in this flow, I'm calling child flows, which gets a couple of information from Dataverse. And here I'm calling this Power Automate desktop flow, which is supplying all that information I want to supply to that flow, everything, you know. And here I'm using Azure Key Vault, so it's secured strings I'm passing on. I don't have to hardcode your username and passwords, and I'm passing it on then to my part flow in this case, which is running on a cluster. But how that looks like, we will see in a second. So let's see if those 3 invoices are coming in. Let's refresh. Okay, we can also review the run history. Okay, didn't start yet. Takes 2-3 minutes to start. So until this loads, let me show you the actual the deployment we have done to process those part flows. Okay, so here on this side, you will see that we have so-called concept of so-called data gateways. In my scenario, I have a data gateway cluster where I have 2 virtual machines sitting on Azure, right? And those are configured with Power Automate desktop, with an on-premise data gateway, and whatever is required whatever software is required to process those documents, like an SAP installation, a Dynamics installation, and so on. Okay, so if I look at that, here I have all the previous runs of that gateway, and I can see here those are the 2 machines participating in my gateway. Okay, and both of them look like they are online. Now I have here a flag where I can say run on all gateways in the cluster. If I set this, then depending on load and those automations, they are then executed on the relevant machine. I cannot influence this here anymore if I say this, okay? And then you have the different history runs here, where we go in a sec later on also to show that, okay? So this is the monitoring here also on the left-hand side. This is what we have yesterday brought into public preview, the monitoring part, and also the process advisor which will allow you to do all these deeper process mining and analysis. Okay, so where do we have our flow?
So I guess, Apostolos, while you're going through
Yeah.
this, so sometimes Power Automate gets branded as like just a pure citizen or an individual tool. But I think what you're showing here that's hugely powerful is that ability or that idea that you can now centralize these, in this case, business exceptions. And so it can become a situation where a COE can essentially establish patterns that essentially your citizen developers or your business users can therefore implement. And it sort of gives you that best of both worlds where you can have that productivity of democratizing who can build these things, but still being able to bring that all together and still have that centralized visibility. So I would imagine like this works for other use cases beyond just invoices. Is that correct?
Absolutely, exactly. That's why we kept also that's what we discussed in the design principle session. Exactly, that's spot on, right? You take the heavy lifting, all these architecture decision, all these COE decision, DLP policy, security, compliance, auditing, and deployments and so on. You take this off the shoulder of your citizen developers, which can deal with the business problem the best, and you just guardrail them. You put the best foundation in place to make them as productive as possible. And that's absolutely possible, right? But it has also to be absolutely done in order to be successful in that regard. And I think that's what we're showcasing here. The platform itself, only the Power Platform, gives you those abilities to drive that end to end, together, of course, and with Azure and so on. Okay, so here we have seen a minute ago, it has successfully run. So if I go now back to my queue here, I should see new records. Okay, so those came in, let's say, newest to the oldest. Those are the ones which came in and have already been processed just now. We see here that some of them have a business exception. One of them has been processed. So these three were just new, right? You see this from a timestamp, and those were the 3 invoices we have submitted. So what happened here? Now, this is the COE kind of view, right? Where you have really folks here looking also at audit logs and so on. You don't want to give this to a business user because they cannot tell you, okay, what is a low score and what all these other things are here. If you look into that, what is all the other logging stuff I'm getting here? So what is the workflow object? This is really for the Center of Excellence team to do deeper debugging, and they get also machine relevant information and so on, okay? What the business user, and this is what we referred to before, the Fusion teams are doing here, is really working actually with Microsoft Teams. Okay, so let me refresh that. So this is actually what you see here is a very ordinary Power Up. Okay, so build Power Up. This is just the landing screen, which shows the document queue, document details, and audit log directly embedded in the Teams experience. Okay, so this Power Up you have seen, this is here embedded in the Teams experience. And here we have a Teams channel where these Fusion teams like business folks, COE, admins, security folks, and maybe also whatever accountants here in this regard can have a look at and deal with the business exceptions they have been assigned to. You recall from the automation catalog, we can assign a business owner for that automation, and those will be either a team or a dedicated persons who will be notified then here. So if I look here then, instead of this view, which is quite complex, I can be in my daily routine where I have here my chat going on, my video calling like we are doing now, and then you can have really those business exceptions surfacing automatically filtered, of course, by the automation catalog, by who is the business owner, that's a logged in user, and then preloaded here to the business exceptions. I have much more of these statuses here, okay? So what is cool now, you can see here, those are the records which have been come in at, a couple of minutes ago. Those twos, they had business exceptions, right? So if I want to look at the current record, let's say in this 41 here, I can go into details. This is showing me then here in Teams again the details of the queue record. I can even look at the document which was applied to, and all captured in Dataverse. Okay, this is the data model we have defined too. So, and then here I can see, which is very important, those are the form processing OCR labels which have been identified. Okay, and what does the business exception say? So if I go back here and we review that business exception here, let's say the first one, the SAP selected VAT percentage 60% differs from the supplied invoice VAT percentage 19%. Okay, so and then a flag also, which is very important. If you do your desktop automation, your RPA, you have to know what you are automating, right? So it's important to understand the context. Now, in my regard, I know this was just a clerical error when I defined my business process and my desktop flow. So I could say this flow could be easily resubmitted if you rectify this or not. There are other exceptions like this one where the amounts, not only the percentage, but also the amount don't add up. And you can see I have defined this on the part side that they cannot be resubmitted. So what was the recommendation here? If I go back quickly here to that business exception, newest to oldest. Let's look here, and I see also the count. How many exceptions did I have? So if I go here into that record, and I see here from a business exception, I can go here and look at this very detailed business exception. What is the recommendation here? It's really, sorry, it was the wrong one. So what is the recommendation? Contact the vendor to issue a credit note for this invoice and ask them to send a new invoice. And this was the exception details. Those things, they have been played back from the Power Automate desktop flow. Okay, so if we look at this as well, how that looks like, this is Power Automate desktop. And this is the whole flow, which is doing all this execution to SAP. I have 3 subroutines. One of them is processing invoice. And in processing invoice, depending on what information comes back from my SAP automation, I can check later on different states. If first of all, if I had technical errors, then if I had business exceptions. If I had a business exception, which is only this, I could say, okay, what is here on that business exception? What is my recommendation I'm doing here? And here's the recommendation. You cannot see that really, but I can highlight it for you, right? So in this exception case, I would like to recommend these kind of things. And also make a call if that thing can be resubmitted or not. Okay, so the folks who are doing this RPA stuff, that's why it's important there are more citizen RPA developers than real RPA developers, because to understand that context, that requires business domain knowledge. And those folks have to work together, right? So heavy lifting by the RPA developers, yes, to provide those components, but then the context has to be understood and very well fed back. Okay, so this is what we have done here in this. And if you go back to our teams here, I can easily go to that exception, which was a little bit minor. And then let's say I would like to rectify this. I say, okay, I go here to that record. I'm not only saying that I'm doing that, but I can now go in here and edit that. What the AI builder has identified, I can override it. Then I can say now save this. Okay, I go back to my record. I can say, okay, I have VAT text rectified. Once I do this, this will become this, and this will go into status ready. So if I go now here and filter by ready, this has been rectified here, and this can be now reprocessed by the engine, which is running in any second. We will see then this disappear and being processed. Now, and here comes now the important part, why we say here end to end. You see this small button here which says Audit Log?
I do see that.
Yeah, in Dataverse, there's a concept which is called audit logging. So you can audit user interaction, CRUD operations where, you know, things have been removed, have been updated and created. And also, which is then landing on the Office Security and Compliance Center, also user access. Who has accessed this automation record? You know, not only who has read it, so you cannot say I've not seen it and so on. So you can really streamline this in up to this level if you want. So once this is enabled, then I can say for my entities, whenever I do a change in that, because you know, from an auditing perspective, you don't just change the VAT text. You have to prove that later on, if an audit comes, that somebody has changed that record. In order to do that, we have leveraged the Dataverse auditing capabilities. So if we go back here to this one, and I look now in the audit log of that record, first of all, I see all the updates which have happened on the document queue itself. And also, if I go here to the details, and I click here, you remember we changed the VAT amount to 16%. So if I click on that level, I click on the log, and this is now the standard Dataverse logging mechanism. Old value, new value, who did it, when I did it, and what was the action, without me programming anything. This is just given by the platform and just used in the design principle. We have decided to do so. Okay, so and that's, I mean, there's so much more to this whole use case and to this whole automation story. We will have a lot of other videos where we go deep, you know, how to feed exactly those telemetry from a Power Automate desktop to Dataverse with web APIs, how to do caching, how to do curl scripts, how to do PowerShell scripts, how to do all these things which the you know, heavy lifting usually from the COE teams will be done, so that business user like here in this regard can then really concentrate on the real problem, either assisting in building those super advanced flows because they have the domain knowledge, or at least being you know, as a subject matter expert to those COE teams to build those end-to-end scenarios. This goes well beyond, you know, it's just a small automation I want to do. Yeah, and I think if we look back to the slide deck, I think that's more or less what we wanted to cover in this series. So we have seen cloud flows, we have seen desktop flows, human in the loop, where I did some interactions, credential store, we have used Azure Key Vaults, reusable templates, we have seen a child flow was executed, building the process, of course, logging, we have seen monitoring, we have seen exception handling, auditing, AI integration, and last but not least, all the ROI stats, they come back here into my automation record on each and every level. When I go here now on the catalog level, because everything is summarized on the catalog level, I have all these telemetries I can easily extend here. And then you can do Power BI dashboards and advanced reporting, because Dataverse with the new TDS endpoints will allow you to do direct query to the CDS instance or the Dataverse instance, where you can automatically import those things. From a schema perspective, it does direct queries, and it also auto detects all the relationships the Dataverse has been defined here, right? And if you have then a report which shows you some logging information, you have then here all the different entities you can make use of to do your advanced analytics later on. Okay.
What comes up a fair bit in the community, right, is the data sources, right? Like, what data source should I use? Should I use Dataverse? Should I use SharePoint? Should I use a relational database? And I think what you've just demonstrated is how powerful Dataverse is, and that implementing an auditing solution and doing it well is actually quite hard. It seems simple, but it's actually quite hard. And what you've been able to demonstrate is how that is largely out of the box, right? Yeah. And just by being able to collect and know where those logs are and then making them accessible is actually a huge win and a huge productivity saver for people. And it is one of those things. I am a fan of Dataverse, and that's absolutely one of the features is why. So that was great to see.
Awesome, exactly. And here's, you know, and it's really not rocket science. It just, you know, and this series will show you, give you hints at least on how to do that. So it's really about using the web API, because we said before, Dataverse is not only a database, it is really a hyperscale database as a service, if you would like, which exposes APIs, which can, in this scenario, just be used to, you know, write those logs back to Dataverse in a standard API HTTPS manner. Okay, that's it, John. Back to you.
Oof, man, I feel like that was a master class, like show and tell. That was intense. I'm impressed with the solution. I feel like everybody's going to want this now. Like anyone who sees this can be like, I need that in my life, because they didn't know that they needed it before, but now that I've seen it, I know that I need it. And so I'm sure that a lot of people are going to feel the same. That's an amazing. I mean, what the solution does is amazing, but the architecture and the attention to detail and talking about all those design principles, adding in logging, monitoring, understanding, AI, all that, like to see it all there in practice, man, that was impressive. That is a fantastic solution.
That's awesome. And you know, the best, that's why it's also a special series. It's close to Christmas. We will make this available later on to download as well. So people can have a look how we have done all these things. We will have to polish a lot of things up, but that's our aim, yeah.
Nice. You heard it here first, guys. So you know who to bug. You go ask Apostolos when it's ready. Not me. Okay. Wow. All right. That was a lot to take in. I think that we covered all of those points and more, and getting to see that solution and find out that one day we might get to have our hands on it is pretty exciting. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap up here, part number 4, and we'll see you back in the next video.